Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to another Tea Time SEO. Looks like this one will be the last one of the year because no one wants to join us on Christmas Day or Boxing Day, whenever it was going to be scheduled. And we are delighted, myself and Carrie here as usual, delighted that we've been joined by Jess and Alex Bova to talk about content marketing and is there a role for AI machine learning in devising and executing content marketing campaigns. We'll keep it short and sweet as usual. I've got my cup of Assam tea. When we started lockdown, it used to be lots of cakes, but the kids have now gone to school, so it's no cakes for me. But I hope everyone else is indulging. And we will get started. So Jess, maybe just want to introduce yourself, and then Alex, and then we'll get into it.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Jess Peace, as you so delightfully just said. I'm a senior content producer at Neomam Studios, and our bag is all about creating hero content campaigns that drive lasting SEO results and land dreamy AF links. I'll be polite because it's still tea time. So I've worked in various roles in content and SEO for around 6 years now, doing things like strategy and production, which is currently what I kind of specialize in. Worked with a number of clients from big to small and all with different points of AI machine learning wrapped within that as well. I'm passionate about all things creative and content, and I love a good Yorkshire tea.
Don't we all? Absolutely. Super, Jess. Well, thanks for appearing again. We really appreciate you taking the time. And over to you, Alex.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alex. I'm an SEO director at 3 Pipe Reply. So we're a brand performance agency based in London. As Jess mentioned, I've worked in a number of different kind of areas of SEO, starting in content marketing and now kind of more on the technical side. My day-to-day includes kind of coordinating and delivering SEO projects from content audits to kind of technical audits. I've worked across a number of different kind of brands, clients, and verticals, from kind of Aviva and Panasonic, which I've mentioned there, to crypto, so like diversify. In my spare time, just love reading about the latest tech. Photography is one of my passions. That's what I've got a degree in, and I'd love watching literally films. That's me.
Great. Well, thank you very much, guys, and thanks for spending some time. We'll get straight into it. So, Alex, I think you're going to kick us off.
Sure.
Can you hear us, Alex? We seem to have lost you for a second. Okay, good.
I think the Wi-Fi is quite bad in the office. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, all good.
Perfect. Yeah, I think so. Starting off with AI, I think there's a lot of kind of benefits in different areas of content marketing where AI can help. So starting with the research and kind of data collections, we've got some in-house tools where that we use to kind of scrape search results, mainly Google search results, and then kind of analyze and classify that data in order to be able to identify valuable kind of topics and content to produce. So I think one that we've kind of used lately is analyzing and scraping kind of user reviews on product pages to understand better what people are asking about products. So if we say something doesn't know how to use, I don't know, a TV, and there's questions around TV in these reviews, we would scrape the reviews and analyze the intent behind or the sentiment behind the reviews, whether it's good or bad, and then kind of try and pull topics out of that and create content answering user queries. So nice. The reviews then become more positive. So then kind of onto the analyzing and planning part, I think AI can be very useful to kind of especially analyzing user intent behind search queries and then better planning content based on that user intent. So that's kind of the initial steps of the content marketing where I think AI could be useful. I think the main part would be the actual production of the content. So we carried out a study last year looking into kind of how AI can help produce content, because obviously there's a lot of benefits to kind of using AI for content production. Because it's a lot easier, you can produce it at scale, and there's a lot less manual work that goes into it. So we carried out a kind of a study last year and analyzed how AI would perform in terms of creating long-form editorial content. And what we found was analyzing kind of 3 different subjects, let's say, so fashion, pharma, and sports, just to kind of get a varied industry and how it would perform in different industries. And so we use kind of widely accessible tools, so not kind of really expensive software, so tools that are widely accessible to everyone. And basically the way these tools work is you plug in a keyword or a topic, and the AI works its magic and it generates an article based on that topic or keyword. And what we found was when you kept the kind of articles or content that you produce fairly short, the AI would actually work quite well. But when it came to longer, kind of more editorial pieces of content, it didn't perform that well, because basically all it did was scrape search results based on that query or topic or keyword and kind of amalgamate all these articles into one, and then produce kind of the final piece, which would basically be paraphrasing other articles or snipping bits of other articles and combining them into one. So kind of that's the part where I think in the future AI might be most useful, so the actual content production. But in terms of what you can use it at the moment, is kind of page titles, meta descriptions, or product descriptions on kind of product pages or on-page copy, because like I said, it works really well for kind of short couple of paragraphs of content, but when it comes to editorial pieces, it's not very effective. And what we found in the study was that grammatically and kind of structurally, the articles were fine, but then there was a lot of kind of mistakes, especially in the pharma articles, where it was referencing, I mean, I'm not a doctor, but some of the information that it put in there, I'm pretty sure if you followed it, you get very ill. So for a highly regulated industry like pharma, it's not the type of content that you'd see published on the NHS, for example. So I think
more
AI
likely to fall foul of sort of your money or your life type of issues if you start to do it in that area, especially.
100%. I'm pretty sure people would be taken to court quite often. So yeah, I think depending on the industry, it can be, and the length of the content in terms of production, it's got its benefits certainly, but at the moment, the kind of widely accessible tools can only be used for short form content and kind of on-page copy. And then in terms of the last step in the kind of content marketing or process, apart from distribution, obviously, the optimization of content. So here, again, there's other tools that are widely available online where you just plug in an article and it optimizes it for you based on the keywords that you kind of insert. And again, that works fairly well, but all it's doing at the moment is paraphrasing that article based on other articles that cover similar topics online. So again, I think kind of to sum up, basically, it's the technology that's widely available isn't there yet, but it's certainly got kind of potential for the future. And it will be in 5 to 10 years' time with the rate that technology is evolving at the moment, it will definitely be something that we can make use of. And I think a question that we get a lot when talking about AI is, will it replace human writers? And from the kind of study that we carried out, in the next 5 years' time, I wouldn't worry about it at all. But potentially in 5 to 10 years' time, it could get to a point where it would mimic human writers, but there'll always be kind of a place for people, I think, in that process, whether it's reviewing the content. So all the AI will be able to do is kind of pump out this content, but there'll always need to be a human kind of element into the input of the topic of the article and the kind of initial starting point, and also the end point of reviewing the content before it gets published. So yeah, I think the last line of that bottom kind of sums it up, is really a resource, not a threat.
So safe to dabble with it, but use it in limited use cases right now. Stay on the safe side.
Definitely.
Of Google and everybody else. Okay, perfect. All right. Well, and the study you mentioned, Alex, if people wanted to get hold of that study, I know you gave a presentation at Brighton SEO, didn't you, some time ago? So where could they find a copy of that?
Sure. I mean, we've got it on our website. So the Free Pipe Reply website, we've got the presentation that we gave, recording of it. Or if not, then you can contact me on LinkedIn, and I'm more than happy to share a copy of it with you. Okay,
brilliant. And I've read the slides. There's a lot more than you'd have time for in today in Tea Time SEO. So for the people watching now or later, do Google 3Pipe and get yourself a copy of that presentation. It's interesting reading. So thanks for sharing some highlights there with us, Alex. And we'll move on to Jess.
Hello. I'm so glad that Alex has just said 5 years, because it means that for at least the next 5 years I should have a job still. But I'm going to actually echo a lot of the things that you said, and then also put like sort of some thoughts in there as well. So mine are very generalized tips. I'm not really going to mention any tools, but I will name drop a few people and a few folks that I think are sort of working in this space and doing good things. So tip number one, also I talk really quickly. I'm terribly Yorkshire, so I'm sorry if you can't tell what I'm saying, but the words are there, so feel free to read along.
They can always slow it down on YouTube and the playback. It's not a problem.
Just watch it back at like minus speed. So the first tip is when creating content, you want to always have your user in mind. If you've ever seen me talk before, sorry, but also this is something that I always go on about. It's that whenever you create a piece of content, you want to think about who's going to be the end user of that. So what's the purpose of it? Is it engaging? Is it informative? Is it relevant? Because this is the key metric as to whether or not a piece of content is going to perform well. I guess what I'm trying to get at with that is that as much as we can kind of analyze data and we can use AI to sort of determine spaces in content and areas that we need to focus on, there still is a bit of a human element to it, as Alex said, in knowing exactly who your target audience are. Which takes us into the second point. So spend a good chunk of your time researching and collecting the data and planning first before you go straight into it. So again, I suppose this is a bit more of a how to use AI and utilize it properly, rather than instead of sort of going in there and trying to automate everything, looking at what you can automate well and where this really comes into play. So obviously one thing that we know from AI and machine learning is that it's very good at analyzing data. So from that, we can, predict things that are coming up. We can make sure that we know what sort of keyword intent is. We can look at how people are using different services and sort of how they're consuming different types of content. But to actually know our target audience, we need to know like who they are as people. So from things like audience profiling to content audits, as Alex said, to analyzing competitors, we can use AI in all of these things. But again, this is something that we kind of need to lean into being human to do as well. So one thing that I always say is when you're creating content, the best sort of way to put together a strategy going forward is to see what you've already got and see what works. So as much as we can use AI to program what's coming up, the best way to look at it is to use it to see how it analyzes things that we've already done, if that makes sense. So in terms of researching and collecting data, really use that and lean into that to make sure that you've got a good profile of who you're creating for. And then from there onwards, you'll be gold in sort of why you're creating it. So just on that section, when sort of looking at data, there are a couple of people that I want to drop in. So Andrew Charlton, we were talking about this guy before, from Crawl SEO. He does a lot of things with keywording sheets. So particularly if you're in digital PR as well and content marketing, there's a way that we can sort of tap into that to come up with campaign ideas or to look at headlines which might be generated, which is a really cool tool. Also as well, a guy that needs no surname, Thierry, head of data and insights. He's always building sheets and building tools that tap into data and see how we can own that really creatively. My third point is to keep automated content short and sweet. So again, as Alex said, sorry, I'm just taking his talk. It's something that works really well for things like page titles and meta descriptions. The SEO in me thinks that AI works really, really well for those things, because if you've ever worked on a website that has an F ton of pages, the last thing that you want to do is go in and create like a completely unique page title and meta description for each and every one. So it is something that works really well in automating that. But then there is also a side of it where we want to create content which, is going to not be penalized by Google. So when it comes to things like editorial, long form, more creative content, we definitely need a human there involved. So this takes us into the fourth point that I've got there, and that's that I think AI works, but it works best in tandem with humans. So I actually read a cool post on LinkedIn by Craig Jewett, who is the guy behind My Content Pal. So somebody that actually provides this service for a living, a computer that writes content, essentially. So you put in sort of keywords that you want to use, you put in like a topic and it generates something for you. We've actually used this service before and it's neither here nor there. It's not for me to say really, but his post actually leans into how that is actually self-sabotaging your content efforts. So there are points in there where, yes, we know it works, but also for long form content, Google is going to class anything that seems keyword stuffed or without a real sort of source of information as spammy. So whether that's written by a person or a bot, Google's going to know about it. So when it comes to the content that you want to be automated, make sure it's something that you know could not be written better by a human. So then my last point there is work smarter and not harder. So there is a space for it. AI has meant that we can shave time off of things that we want to do. We have more resource to lean into things that require more work. It does things like speed up accuracy and speed and overall productivity. But when it comes to content marketing, maybe less so with SEO, but also, again, to be determined, we want to make sure that there is still a human element. So by using it to work on projects that are larger, so things like data analysis or audience profiling, things like that, we know that we can do that and it'll be relatively in safe hands with a machine. But then when it comes to creating content for the purpose of a reader, a user, to sell something that we want to have emotion, something that we want to be person to person, then obviously you're not going to get that from a machine. So I think the overall theme is that, it works, but there is still a way to go with what is already out there, if that makes sense. You're on mute. Lawrence, you're on mute.
Sorry, it definitely makes sense. I put myself on mute because the dog's just woken up. So, and now she's scratching the door, so she might make an appearance shortly. I was just saying, Jess, it does make sense, and obviously it's a huge topic, and how you potentially could use AI for all these different use cases. And I don't know about you, but I've been excited about this area for many years now. Probably because I'm a really, really slow typer, but also because anything that can improve productivity and help you do things at scale is great. I think the question I've got before I ask whether the audience got any is just relates to scale. And one thing I liked about the Neoman website is you're really upfront about how you go about building quality AF links as you describe them. I'll take that means authoritative followed links, maybe.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, but let's just say these awesome links, and that producing content without attracting good quality links isn't a success for you. So obviously there's a trade-off between scale and producing lots of content and lots of links, and quality, and how do you strike the right balance, whether you use machine learning or not? I mean, how do you strike the right balance between producing significant impact for clients and trying to produce a reasonable amount of work for your monthly retainer?
Oh, so I guess with us at Neoman, it's a little bit different. So as you said, it is definitely more about creating content that people want to share for like months and years to come. So the content that we do is always content that, one, we're interested in making, that we think has a purpose and will have an audience behind that. So people that actually want to read it and people that want to cover it. It's less about I guess the SEO side of it. It's not about scaling. It's not about doing an X amount of posts per month. However, I have worked in roles where that has been the case. So I do think there is a space for it, but it depends what kind of agency or brand or client that you're working with. I think to sort of get the right balance, it's about creating content that does have a purpose. So you can absolutely automate that still. You can have like an editorial calendar in mind for agencies that sort of create that type of content. And know what you want to write about. You can automate keywords, you can automate sort of trends and like audit things so that you know what the gap analysis is like, and absolutely use AI within that. But for the kind of content that I create currently with our team, it's definitely more about like a user-focused, people-focused, content-loving audience, really. So we don't really use that, but I do think there is a space for it. So I think to get that balance, it's about knowing what you want to write, who for and why, and then deciding how much of that can be automated. So I think when it comes to things like straight up data and factual pieces, by all means, run away with it. When it comes to things where, again, you want to show emotion, you want to show like depth and reasoning, and maybe you want to push a consumer to buy something or have a certain complete a certain action on your website, you're not going to do that if you're not thinking in a human mindset, from my perspective, I think.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, and it's got me thinking. And one of the things we've just been working on, so we, obviously we do data collection and content strategies tools, and so data aggregation, collecting data from SERPs, measuring user intent is all well and good, and we can do it for millions of keywords. And we've got a new algorithm that actually sort of analyzes all those keywords and to try for e-commerce brands or publishers. You can find, where Google's favoring e-commerce landing pages or where they're favoring long form article content. And then you can obviously match that to your keywords accordingly that are important to you, find related questions. So you can feed that kind of stuff to an AI or a content team, but it obviously depends on the kind of content. So, for example, I think you used an example we were chatting before the show about, or maybe Alex did, what to wear on a night out or something, a Christmas night out. Whereas that might require a bit more structure and thinking and logic than perhaps an article or an e-commerce page around, I don't know, the 10 best types of side table for your dining room, which might be less inspiring and perhaps a bit more kind of factual, and you can pull stuff from your product catalog and automate some content around it. So, Alex, you made the point about AI being good for short content, not long. And was I right in hearing you said the limitation for you for short was just a couple of paragraphs? How far would you push it?
I think it really depends. I think it's just a trial and kind of error, test and error, trial and test basically. So I think you can try it and then see how far you can go, because I think depending on the topic, like we were talking about earlier, and the kind of industry, I think you might get away with getting a little bit more longer pieces of content, and depending on what the topic and the industry really. But when it comes to, I think we used pharma as an example earlier, there I wouldn't go past a couple of paragraphs, so probably meta descriptions, maybe on-page copy, but it needs to be reviewed heavily before it's published on the website. Whereas kind of other industries that probably don't require factual kind of accuracy, you could probably get away with a little bit longer. But I think it's just about trying the tech and seeing what works for your specific industry or for that specific topic, and then kind of taking those learnings into account and then using them moving forward.
Yeah. Okay. Would you describe the AI today as we were talking about earlier, going back 15 years and you started in SEO and article spinners that would just change the odd keyword, and now we've kind of, some of the tools you described sound a bit like article paraphrasers, so they're using AI to paraphrase other people's content as opposed to writing it itself. So kind of, how would you characterize the tools that are available for content creation today on that continuum? Are they good enough to write content about a fresh topic that no one's already written about and the AI has not been trained on already? Or really is it a question of only writing content about stuff that already exists out there on the web?
So from the tools that kind of we used for our study, it was based on kind of keywords around topics that had already been written about. And I think that's what the AI tools kind of use to generate the content. When it comes to, I think that's quite an interesting point actually, when it comes to a new topic that's not been spoken about before, say a new technology that comes out, I'm not actually sure how the AI would go about creating that content, because it's got nothing to base the content on. So I think that's quite an interesting thing, and potentially we could do another study kind of in the future looking into that topic.
But see, I think that's what's missing for me, because from what you guys have said today, we've seen AI being used. We talked about some examples. AI had won a Japanese poetry competition. It was used for publishing, automatic publishing of results from the Olympics. I think you mentioned The Guardian had used it for a long form article. So we know there's lots of use cases, beating, who was it? Did it beat at chess? Kasparov, did you say? So we've got some great examples of AI in practice and use, and we know that we're using it, in the SEO field. So you mentioned Andrew's keyword in Sheets is a good example for everyone who's watching out there. Just go to keywords in Sheets, and you can see he's got a little GPT-3 plugin that you put in a script, and you put in a keyword phrase, and it will write you a nice little title and description. And it's pretty good. So the OpenAI product, if you guys haven't looked at it, you got to check it out. And I'd also recommend going to, I think it's called GPT-3 GPT3demo.com/map. There's a large list of tools out there that have been written using OpenAI's GPT-3 NLP model. So the things that were missing for me though were passion, emotion. I heard Jess comment on things like that, and also structure. Being able to, it's all very well paraphrasing these articles from other sites that have already published on the topic, and proper AI isn't going to do that. It's going to write it from scratch, but it's building that story and telling a story using that content. And I think that's where the big gap is. And if it makes that leap, then perhaps in 5 years' time we'll look back and go, where did our jobs go? But until then, we think they're relatively safe. So I think with that, I think there was one question from Jerome I saw here, which was, how long will it take Google to identify all of the AI articles someone will publish and make changes in SEO ranking algorithms? I'm not sure how to answer that. I mean, I'm sure this is an area Google's going to look at. I don't know whether Alex or Jess, you've got a perspective on that.
I think the answer to this is it depends, isn't it? That's the only one I can think of. I think we're right in saying that the kind of software and the tools that are out there are getting better. But Google's still pretty hefty at cracking down on content that doesn't seem right. So whether that, like we said, whether that's by a person or by a machine, Google does know what it's doing. And I think as much as we can write for Google, we still need to write for users first and foremost. So I think in terms of cracking down on it, it's still content at the end of the day. There's a reason that people get to use these tools. There's a reason it makes money. There's a reason it does well. But I do think in terms of making changes and like processing that at the minute, it just kind of seems to be content which seems quite spammy. I think if the kind of software that's out there gets cleverer and does become more emotive somehow and can write from like fresh topics, which would be so insane because it'd be like trying to write something without Google existing, right? Then I think it would be harder to determine, and Google would eventually struggle with that. But currently it seems to be doing its job, so thankfully. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. And Alex, any final thoughts on that?
To be honest, I completely agree. I think we spoke about it a minute ago. I think Google will put things in place, and it's quite easy. It's basically machine versus machine, isn't it? If one machine will be able to understand that something's been written by another machine. So it's quite a difficult question to answer. But I think just hit the nail on the head there. So as Google's very smart, so it will be able to detect at the moment if an article's been written by AI. But once the kind of tech or software is able to create content from scratch, like Jess said, then how will it know that it's been written because it's got nothing to base it on?
Yeah. So I think with that, we're just coming to the end of time. It's an interesting space to watch. For me, AI isn't quite at that level yet. If you haven't watched it, there's a short film called, I think it's called Sunspring, written by AI, where they just fed it the AI with lots and lots of film scripts, and then they acted out this sci-fi movie. So if you're really bored on Friday evening, that's something to look for on YouTube. But until then, and until the year 2025, when we're doing Tea Time SEO videos using AI and we're all avatars, we'll let everyone go. Thanks again for joining us. Really appreciated your time today. If people would like to find you following today, Jess, Alex, how can they find you?
Alex, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I mean, just LinkedIn, really. I think I included my details for LinkedIn there. Just, send me a message on LinkedIn, and I'm more than happy to chat about this. It's quite an interesting topic for me.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alex.
Likewise, you can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter as well. It's just @PEACE, so that's PEACE with 3 Y's in the end.
Brilliant. Okay, well, Jess, Alex, thank you so much. Carrie, thanks for organising. That's the last Tea Time SEO this year. We'll be back in January if AI hasn't taken over the world at Christmas. So we'll see you all then. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.